Namaskar. In my three talks on Srimad Bhagavad Gita in modern world, I have discussed the responses of Warren Hastings, Charles Wilkins, then Schlegel brothers, both of them eminent scholars, and the elder brother being a great philosopher as well, and heralded an era of Oriental Renaissance in Europe, and that impact of Gita through Warren Hastings, Charles Wilkins, and Traeger brothers comes to Humboldt, William von Humboldt, and finally I have mentioned Hegel, one of the greatest philosophers of our times, who also has given his own reflections on Gita. Thereafter, the whole intellectual world in Europe is drawn to Gita and Upanishads, and many distinguished scholars, philosophers, and writers we find are seriously engaged with Gita. Amongst them was one of the most outstanding novelists, authors, and philosophers from West, Aldous Huxley. He is one of the major writers in 20th century English literature whose works occupy an important place in modern English literature. He was deeply interested in Indian philosophy and he was closely associated with Jiddu Krishnamurti. He has written the memoirs of his association with Jiddu Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, and Krishnamurti also highly regarded Aldous Huxley. Huxley was profoundly influenced by Gita also, and he benefited largely from Wilkins' translation, and also he could go through many other translations that followed Wilkins. He acknowledged Gita as one of the great philosophical texts in the world. But coming to his association with India and his engagement with Indian philosophy, I would like to make a brief survey of his literary career as one of the most distinguished novelists and essayists and intellectuals of 20th century. He was born on 26th July 1894 in England, and he belonged to a very eminent Huxley family who were renowned contributors to science and literature. His grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, was a celebrated biologist. He was known as Darwin's bulldog, and his father, Aldous Huxley's father, named Leonard Huxley, was a noted writer and editor, and his mother, Aldous Huxley's mother, was Julia Arnold. She also belonged to a distinguished Arnold family of educators and literary figures. And Huxley suffered from serious eye disease during his education. He was partially blind for several years. This was a drawback to his career as a scientist. Even though he was interested in biology, he recovered from this defect sufficiently and then entered Balliol College, University of Oxford, was a student of English literature there, graduated with honors, and then he began his literary career as a poet and journalist. And finally, he established himself as one of the foremost novelists in English. And there is a long list of his novels and his collections of his essays. Most celebrated amongst his novels is Brave New World. Incidentally, Aldous Huxley is one of my favorite authors, and I've gone through some of his novels. Brave New World is a masterpiece and one of the greatest dystopian novels in English literature. It presents the future of human civilization, and it also serves as a sinister warning to mankind today. Aldous Huxley makes studies in civilizations through his novels, and he views the downfall of the whole human civilization, the way it is moving. Has Huxley warned against the dangers of sacrificing human freedom, individuality, and spiritual values in the pursuit of science, scientific and technological progress. And in other novels also he does the same thing besides Brave New World. And his novels offer a kind of prophetic vision of future. Incidentally, cockroach is a memorable symbolic recurring image in some of his work, especially ape and essence. And those who are calling the youth of India as cockroaches, they are fools. They forget. They have not gone through Huxley's works. Huxley says that cockroach will survive. When all the human civilization ends, it is the cockroach who will remain on this earth because it has that surviving capacity which no animal has. You put into drainage or whatever you do, it will survive despite of all the killing drugs, whatever sprays, it will survive. From my personal experience, I can say this. Therefore, respect cockroaches. I'm not making a comment on the youth movement, Cockroach Janata Party. I have high regards for the youth and I respect them. And our leaders should have learned from them. Instead of lecturing them, they should go and learn from them. We elders should learn from them because they are the people from whom we can learn many things today. But this has nothing to do with my lecture, my talk today. Incidentally, Aldous Huxley, in the early decades of 20th century, could view civilization and the danger the challenge with a cockroach will pose before the whole human race. Being a visionary and having a kind of prophetic vision, he could envisage the shape of things to come. His novels that way are relevant even today. So in his post-apocalyptic satirical novel, Huxley repeatedly implies insects, especially cockroaches, even flies and other scavengers, to evoke a world that has survived humanity's self-destruction. Cockroaches function as symbols of survival after nuclear catastrophe. Even after a nuclear war, when whole the human race is annihilated, Aldous Huxley says that cockroaches will remain on this earth. And there is a cockroach, everything is destroyed on this earth, and there is a cockroach viewing the earth in Huxley's novels. Such a sinister warning to the human beings who are destroying the earth. And he also gives a warning on the denigration of human civilization. And he warns that the primitive life will trump, not that trump. So the primitive life will win over human culture and the ironic resilience of the lowest forms of life. When humanity has failed, if we fail, the lowest forms of life will survive. The flies, who have their own civilization, they are more civilized than human beings today. The flies, the ants, the insects. So we should consider whether we have become lower, more denigrated than the insects. So this is a warning. And those who are calling themselves cockroaches and those who are calling them cockroaches, they should realize this, that cockroach is not to be viewed that way. Anyway, coming to Aldous Huxley again. There are symbolic passages in his novels about cockroaches. And he very vividly describes cockroaches in a kind of very vivid images in his novel Ape and Essence, in his another novel also, Island, and in his masterpiece Brave New World also. Insects find a passing references that way. Huxley is coming again to us, and Huxley is relevant for me because of his association with India. He loved India. He came to India, of course, in the last phase of his life when his health was failing and his eyesight was already weak. But he was an iconic figure by that time. And British officers were enamored by his presence. They welcomed him. He used to attend several dinners and parties given by hosted in his honor by British officers. He has written on them. And is critical of the artificiality and social distance of the colonial rulers from the ground realities of India. And his observations are equally very ironic. About the British rule. He had relations with the Indian leaders. He attended Kanpur session of Indian National Congress and he heard the lecture of Mahatma Gandhi. There is no proof that he personally met Mahatma Gandhi, but he used to visit Jiddu Krishnamurti and they had lengthy discussions about which Aldous Huxley has written. There is a phase in the literary career of Aldous Huxley. After his grand success as a novelist, he gradually moved to philosophy and to spirituality. And in 1937, he moved to California, where his intellectual interest gradually shifted from social criticism to philosophy, mysticism, and comparative religion and psychology. And he developed profound interest in Vedanta, Buddhism, and Eastern philosophical traditions. He was closely associated with Vedanta Society of Southern California and was deeply influenced by the teachings of Swami Prabhavananda. And his engagement with Indian philosophy and his readings in Gita significantly shaped his later writings, particularly his reflections on consciousness and spiritual realization. Although he couldn't become a spiritual man. He couldn't become a saint. He remained an intellectual, and his views always remained very logical. Jiddu Krishnamurti could appreciate his logical approach to life and philosophy. But Aldous Huxley said, he has written, that I could sacrifice my whole literary career and I can forget all my books for one moment's mystical experience, because he could understand what a mystic experience means, what the experience of emancipation means. Seeing Jiddu Krishnamurti, he had an understanding of an spiritual life that way. But that was the failure of a Western intellectual not to fully comprehend spirituality. But Aldous Huxley's philosophical works are very important, and that way the perennial philosophy, published in 1945, is a masterpiece. In this work, Aldous Huxley argues that world's greatest religious traditions share a common metaphysical truth. Another work by Aldous Huxley is Doors of Perception, published in 1954, and it makes investigations in altered states of consciousness, because Huxley was interested in philosophy also, and he discusses heaven and hell and experiences at the other level of consciousness he discusses, and he continues with these reflections and with his perceptions and his views of mystical experience. The Island is his last novel, published in 1962, and he presents the view of an ideal society founded upon ecological balance, education, and scientific responsibility. This should be read by every generation. It is the final culmination, it is the culmination of his whole philosophical moorings and his experiences and his reactions to modern civilization. And it's a constructive counterpart to these earlier novels which I have discussed, especially Brave New World. All the writings of Aldous Huxley are marked by intellectual depth, and his satire and irony, especially in his novels, and his spirit of inquiry and logic in his philosophical works. His writings explore enduring themes like conflict between science and spirituality, misuse of technology, the nature of freedom and search for truth, and the possibilities of human consciousness. But coming to his engagement with Vedanta, Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita, Aldous Huxley, there are many ideas from his association with Jiddu Krishnamurti. He remained with Jiddu Krishnamurti, his wife was with him, Huxley's wife, and he admired Jiddu Krishnamurti for his ideas on freedom from psychological conditioning, direct perception of truth, and rejection of religious authority and dogma, for which I also appreciate Jiddu Krishnamurti and his idea of self-knowledge as a basis of transformation. Jiddu Krishnamurti could appreciate Huxley's intellectual honesty and his wide knowledge of Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. Jiddu Krishnamurti used to hear the ideas by others, and he was very inquisitive also, and he was a good listener. He could listen. Huxley wrote a foreword to Krishnamurti's celebrated book, The First and Last Freedom, and he describes Krishnamurti as one of the most remarkable contemporary religious teachers whose teachings pointed directly towards inner freedom without dependence upon institutions and creeds. This, of course, his introduction to The First and the Last Freedom is a remarkable essay by Aldous Huxley, and it is marked with his deep understanding of India's mystical and philosophical traditions. Coming to Huxley's impressions on Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Huxley was profoundly influenced by the philosophy of Gita. He not only viewed Gita as a religious book, apart from the religious outlook, which comes in Warren Hastings' view of Gita, he didn't treat Gita as a sectarian Hindu scripture. Unlike Warren Hastings, he didn't treat Gita as a sectarian Hindu scripture, and he regarded Gita as one of the world's greatest expressions of universal spiritual philosophy. And like Humboldt and Hegel, and also Charles Wilkins, and even Warren Hastings, he appreciated the philosophy of Nishkama Karma, selfless action. But Huxley explains the relevance of the philosophy of Gita, whether it is Nishkama Karma or the idea of unity of knowledge, devotion, and action, or the idea of Atman. He explains the relevance of these ideas for modern world. That way, Huxley becomes more relevant for us today when he explains the relevance of the ideas of Gita for modern society and for modern men. And Huxley admired Gita's doctrine that action should be performed without attachment to its fruits. Karmanyavadhikarasti ma phareshu kadachana, the famous saying of Gita. This also is cited by Huxley, and he considers the teaching of Gita as a practical method for overcoming egoism and achieving spiritual freedom. Then he appreciated the idea of the unity or the synthesis between Gyan, Karma, and Bhakti, knowledge, devotion, and action. And he says that modern world needs this kind of samanvaya, this kind of synthetic view of knowledge, devotion, and action. And then the idea of eternal self as given by Gita. Aldous Huxley very much appreciates it in his masterpiece philosophical work, The Perennial Philosophy, and he believes that the realization of the divine self constituted the ultimate goal for all authentic mystical traditions. So because of his association with Krishnamurti, he could view the Atman of Gita as the divine self. And then he said that it will lead to a kind of mystical experience and connection to mystical traditions of the Eastern world. Then Aldous Huxley finally explores the universal spiritual vision through his study of Gita, and he regarded Gita as transcending historical and cultural, a text that transcends historical and cultural boundaries. And the teachings of Gita addressed to universal questions concerning the destiny of human being, is the duty and consciousness and freedom and liberation also. Huxley prominently mentions the philosophy of Gita in his masterpiece, The Perennial Philosophy. And he gives several citations from Gita, directly from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. He also cites Upanishads as well. Of course, he also cites Christian mystics, and he was a very good reader of Buddhist texts, also of Sufi literature. He cites all these texts. Their Gita and Upanishads, they also function as major works that influenced and that shaped his ideas. He viewed that Gita makes the clearest statements of universal metaphysical truths shared by the world's contemplative traditions. With this, I come to the end of this series of my discussions on Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the modern world. There are many other eminent philosophers in West, like Henry David Thoreau, one of the leading philosophers and essayists of 19th century, who also studied Gita. And Emerson, another eminent philosopher, he also studied Gita, and both Thoreau and Emerson, they also refer to Gita. But since I have not studied these philosophers, they might be very eminent philosophers. I will not go to them. And thank you very much. Thank you again.